Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is an animated superhero comic book film created by Sony Pictures Entertainment based on Marvel Comics. The film has gotten a lot of praise from movie critics and general audience. There are many great aspects of this film, from the animation, the action, and such. But in this video I want to focus on the characters by analyzing how they fit within the themes of the story and how they grow and change. Before we begin, do note that I'm going to start with the most developed characters first, and then least developed, so some characters I might not talk about for as long. With that being said, let's swing right into this. Miles Morales' arc is certainly an interesting one, mainly because it combines a coming-of-age story with a comic book origin story. In particular, the Spider-Man movies have often been a metaphor for growing up and transitioning into an adult while learning about responsibility. Spider-Verse does the same with Miles' arc. Before Miles even gets his spider powers, he's forced to go to an advanced school by his parents that put a ton of expectations on him. However, compared to getting powers, Miles doesn't take his schoolwork too seriously. Miles actively tries to get himself quit and avoids doing schoolwork by sneaking out to see Uncle Aaron. Miles never really felt the consequences of his actions and never feared like what he was doing was the most important thing in the world. Instead, it's when Miles gets his powers where he feels the weights of responsibility on him. This creates an interesting contrast with how in the Spider-Man movies, Peter felt exhilarated and confident when he first gained his powers, while throughout Spider-Verse, Miles constantly fears his powers. Well, he doesn't fear his powers, but mainly the responsibility and consequences that come with having to use those powers. From Miles seeing Spider-Man get brutally killed by Kingpin, thus telling Miles if he also wants to be a superhero like Spider-Man, he might end up getting murdered by Kingpin too, only increasing his fear. What's interesting is how Miles' parents think that his fear has to do with school and being in a new environment, but he's actually struggling with his powers. It's understandable because when you're a teen, your life is essentially building up for you to become an adult to gain a purpose on society, and that purpose can turn out good or bad.
Peter, these are the years when a man changes into the man he's going to become the rest of his life. Just be careful who you change into.
Throughout Miles' arc, he can't find a way to control his powers. Despite being given natural abilities, Miles constantly doubts himself and feels as though he doesn't have the natural ability to become like the rest of the spider people. However, Miles doesn't realize that that mentality is specifically what is preventing him from becoming a superhero like Spider-Man. In particular, this is a mindset many share when discussing superheroes. Superheroes are often looked at as being unrealistic to inspire to be. To have a flawless person dress up to hide their identity while fixing everyone's problems with natural abilities that aren't possible in the real world makes them not worth inspiring to be. They're viewed more as natural forces to prevent evil than actual people. More of a fantasy. Spider-Man even says at the beginning that only he is what stands between evil overtaking the city.
The only thing standing between this city and oblivion is me. There's only one Spider-Man, and you're looking at him.
In real life, it's similar to how people look up to those who look naturally strong and talented, who are viewed to have been given their talents rather than struggled to earn them. This can happen because from our point of view, we never saw the actual struggle within our inspirations' lives, so we just assume that they're perfect people and always have been. Such a thought can increase dramatically, especially if the person you look up to hides their identity, like how Spider-Man wears a mask, or in real life how popular YouTubers hide their identities. However, this mindset begins to change when Miles meets the other spider people behind the masks. Miles sees how each of them have lost something in their life by becoming successful as a superhero. For example, while Peter Parker's origin story was shown to not have that much of a struggle, Peter B. Parker's origin story shows a more depressing side to Spider-Man by showing Miles how even someone as strong as Spider-Man can give up. From Miles learning that being a superhero is a more human thing, he realizes that being a superhero isn't just the powers themselves, but the motivation to use them. Throughout the story, Miles is constantly being taught information. However, none of it clicks or stays with Miles, and he often ends up back to where he began. However, it's not that Miles didn't understand the information, but he simply wasn't motivated or comfortable using that information. While information can provide people with answers, motivation is what makes people use that information to solve their problems. Without inspiration, there is no motivation. Miles believes that superheroes like Spider-Man are invincible due to their powers helping them not feel pain to get up, just like how we view those who inspire us as naturals who take no hits. However, Spider-Man's use of his abilities are only possible because he himself gets up and not his powers. All of Miles' power struggles are because he is constantly held back by his fears. Whenever Miles is relaxed, he's able to take that leap of faith and use his powers properly. Whether it be from when Peter B. Parker tells Miles to stop listening to his constant advice on how to swing properly so Miles can motivate himself to learn on his own, or from the end of the movie where Miles on his own takes the biggest leap of faith from a skyscraper. Or even during the beginning where Miles is just casually drawing art to music. By Miles being able to motivate himself to get through the challenges of being a superhero, he's able to properly learn that with success comes failure, and no matter how many times you get hit, you always get back up to do the right thing. This is what it means to be a superhero. Aside from that, Miles learns another aspect on what it means to be a superhero. In an interview with writers Phil Lord and Chris Miller, they had this to say about the themes of Spider-Verse.
Problematic thing about superheroes is it can tell you that someone else is going to come and save you. And I think the neat thing about having a movie with a bunch of spider people in it is you understand that it democratizes the superhero thing, that it can happen to any of us, right? It just like everybody in your life might be putting on that mask in the evening. I want young people to understand that it's up to them, that they cannot wait to be chosen, and that it's not a birthright. We all have to choose to be heroic in whatever way is unique to us, and that's ultimately what Miles figures out.
Right, and I think it really it connects to me personally. I feel like you've got something different about you, and that's what makes you you, and then that can be the thing that is your greatest asset. That can be the thing that you can use to help the world.
This brings up an interesting approach to how people usually view superheroes and the impact they have on others. Like I said before, superheroes are often looked up to as being these forces of good that are meant to save people from their problems, not help them fix their problems, but to save them from their problems. Often people think that superheroes are only defined by their powers, but it's actually their powers and, most importantly, their ideas. The costume that Spider-Man wears isn't just a reminder of what his power is, but is a symbol to inspire those to be a superhero like him. This is why when Miles' dad encourages Miles to get up after taking heavy damage from Kingpin, he gains the will to stand up and stop Kingpin. Because Miles' dad can't stop Kingpin, he chooses to inspire Miles, which was the invisible force that caused Miles to get up and keep fighting. If Miles' dad wasn't there, Miles probably wouldn't have survived without the inspiration. Even before this, Miles is able to save Peter B. Parker from sacrificing his life to save Miles by convincing him to go back home where he's safe. Instead of forcing Peter, he convinces him to let go in order to save himself, which he does by choosing to let go. A different person's point of view is often enough to change us for the better. We don't always need people to be doctors, firemen, or police officers to save our lives. Often inspiring others is enough to cure our lack of willpower. For example, Stan Lee, the creator of Marvel Comics and Spider-Man, who sadly passed away, once said that he was embarrassed to be a comic book writer. because he felt like everyone else had more impactful jobs on society. However, he learned that entertainment is an important thing to people's lives, and without it, they might go off the deep end. Entertainment can often be seen as a distraction from our problems, but often it can be used to keep us going. This is how Miles learns that anyone can wear the mask. We all have the ability to save each other both physically and mentally. It's our different points of view that shape us into great people. Miles Morales learns to not only motivate himself, but to inspire others with his new perspective. That is how Miles Morales truly became not just Spider-Man, but an inspiration. Peter B. Parker, the other Spider-Man from an alternate dimension where he didn't die, was handled perfectly in this movie. Everyone agrees that the way Spider-Man was portrayed in Spider-Verse was very unique and perfectly fits the character, which is sorta surprising considering that the wise, washed-up mentor who lost hope in fear of failure can often backfire and disappoint fans of the original portrayal of the character, such as Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. However, it's because this portrayal fits Peter's character and the themes of the story so well. Often I felt the best way to develop a character further is that in their first arc, they have a conflict that resolves, and in their next arc, that resolution becomes a conflict. For example, in the first Spider-Man movie, Peter learns to use his powers responsibly after feeling guilty from not preventing Uncle Ben's killer. So in Spider-Man 2, that responsibility is challenged when it interferes with his personal life, until eventually by the end, Peter decides to stick to being Spider-Man. In particular, Spider-Verse explores Peter's life after he chooses to be responsible with his powers. However, it turns out that Peter's choice in life didn't turn out great. Not only did he lose Aunt May due to old age, but Mary Jane divorced him because of Peter's fear of responsibility and having kids with her. Essentially, Peter's reasoning for not being Spider-Man anymore is because he's lost some of his greatest motivations in life. When people lose or aren't acknowledged for the hard work they put in, they will eventually begin to lose the motivation to do what they love. With Peter losing both of his greatest loved ones, it makes sense as to why it would be hard for him to move on after that. That is, until Peter meets Miles. Miles inspires Peter to relearn what it means to be Spider-Man again. Miles and Peter's dynamic with each other is absolutely perfect. As a matter of fact, their first interaction together creates one of Peter's best lines that sums up his entire character now.
Look, I'm not looking for a side gig as a Spider-Man coach. I got a lot going on in my dimension, like a lot.
With great power comes
Don't
great...
you dare finish that sentence. Don't do it. I'm sick of it.
To have Peter reject Uncle Ben's saying shows just how down on his luck Peter has become. How Peter seriously doesn't care about saving lives by not being Spider-Man anymore. However, despite how depressing and selfish Peter has become, he still does care about being a good person. While Peter ignores Miles and throws him into irresponsible situations, he still does come back to help him. This can happen when people lose their motivation, therefore causing them to become depressed. They get into a state where they still care enough, but still don't have enough motivation to accomplish the same magic they once were. If they try again, they might fail, and if they don't try again, then they won't accomplish anything. Peter is self-aware about his faults and constantly sighs in regret, because he feels bad for leaving Miles alone. Peter is aware that his young self wouldn't do the same. The one time we see Peter hopeful is when he is able to teach Miles how to swing. It's one of Peter's very first accomplishments in a long time. However, that happiness ends when, despite his teachings, Miles still can't control his powers. Because Miles isn't experienced enough with his powers and is the only person that can get them all home, Peter makes the decision to sacrifice himself to get all the other spider people home. This results in what many consider to be Peter's somewhat implied suicide attempt. Since every other spider person is still Spider-Man in their dimension, Peter feels that their lives are more meaningful than his. Peter believes that taking a leap of faith just isn't worth it anymore, because he only went back to where he began after failing to teach Miles how to control his powers. However, it's because of Miles showing Peter that he was able to take that leap of faith and make it work that inspires Peter to retake that leap of faith to get his life together again. Often trying to do good is a difficult task, and it requires lots of leaps you might not make, but you never know unless you try. Thus, this is how Peter learns what it means to be Spider-Man again. Miles' dad's arc is him learning that you can't force people to be good. Just like Miles' school, Miles' dad puts a lot of expectations on him. In particular, Miles' dad doesn't really care if Miles refuses to not want to go to an advanced school. Despite Miles' reasoning not to, Miles' dad would rather force him to be good rather than convince him. However, after Uncle Aaron passes away in front of him, he explains his true reasoning for pushing Miles was that he was worried he would take the wrong path in his life.
You know, me and your dad used to do this back in the day.
Stop lying.
It's true. Then he took on the cop thing, and I don't know. He's a good guy, just, you know what I'm saying.
Just like what Uncle Aaron said, Miles' dad isn't necessarily a bad guy. Miles' dad just deeply cares and worries that Miles might not ever listen to his reasoning, thus putting Miles on a wrong path in his life. What's tragic is while we never see Miles' dad and Uncle Aaron's relationship before they broke apart, it's implied that Miles' dad made the hard choice by no longer being together in fear of Aaron's path of crime continuing. And what's sad is that in the end the two never got to make up. While Aaron's choice to be a criminal was bad, Miles' dad decided it would be better to force himself away from Aaron than to inspire him to be better. As a matter of fact, it's Miles who makes Aaron realize his wrongs than Miles' dad ever did. Because of Aaron's death, Miles' dad talks real to Miles. Instead of forcing Miles to say that he loves him, he makes Miles make the decision on his own, whether to or not. Which works as by the end of the movie, Miles chooses to hug his dad. For a kids movie, Miles' dad arc speaks to many of the adults in the audience who struggle when raising a teen. It can be truly scary thinking that the thing you raise dearly could turn against you, but you can't force someone down the right path. You can only steer them in the right direction. Overall, this is how Miles' dad learns to support his son's decisions. Just like Miles' dad, Uncle Aaron is still a good person. Compared to Miles' dad, Uncle Aaron is less strict and more supportive of Miles' decisions. Aaron gives Miles just enough freedom to be on the right path, but is still there when he needs him. Uncle Aaron in real life reminds me of many chill family members that appreciate each other's company. Though despite the lack of scenes with Uncle Aaron, he makes his biggest impact when he's revealed to be the Prowler and is shot and killed by Kingpin. In his last moments, Uncle Aaron realizes that he failed at being a constant inspiration to Miles. Like Uncle Ben's death, Uncle Aaron's death is used to convince Miles to keep going on the right path and don't let bad things stop him. Uncle Aaron redeemed himself by inspiring Miles to be a great man, to use his powers responsibly more so than how he did. Uncle Aaron's arc is that of redemption. Gwen's arc is her learning to no longer fear the death of her friends so she can become friends with Miles. However, unlike every other character I've mentioned, Gwen shows the least amount of struggle within her arc. While Gwen does kinda hesitate to become friends with Miles at the beginning, she doesn't really have any problems talking to Miles. They both even form a kind of romantic relationship together with ease. I would expect Gwen to be more silent and try to avoid Miles' conversations to add more conflict within her arc, but that's not the case. Though that's not to say I didn't like her character, I just wasn't as invested in her arc. I'm sure they'll do more with her in the sequel. I put these three characters all together because they all share the same purpose. Spider-Noir, Penny Parker, and Spider-Ham are all the comic relief and are there to support the theme of anyone can wear the mask. Aside from that, they don't have an arc, but they still fit with the message of the story. At first, I felt like I didn't have much to say about Kingpin's character, but upon reflection, I realized there's a lot to discuss. Now, while Kingpin is a solid villain, there is somewhat of a problem with how his motivation for being a bad guy was handled. It's not so much that his motivation isn't well written, but while every character in Spider-Verse's motivation fits within the themes of the story, Kingpin's motivation doesn't. While it could be argued that Kingpin's motivation shows the bad side of inspiration, how it shows that Kingpin lost his family due to Spider-Man was what inspired him to get revenge on Spider-Man and create the Super Collider, really his motivation is more used as a weakness than an argument. Often a villain's motivation is usually used as a counter-argument to the hero's viewpoint. An example from another animated movie would be Tempest's shadow from the My Little Pony movie. Because friendship betrayed Tempest, she grew up to become a lone wolf then trust others, unlike the main character Twilight Sparkle. Tempest's motivation is specifically used as a counter-argument for the story's themes. The only other counter-argument Kingpin creates is to show how Kingpin abused his power, which made him lose his family. And even after that, he continued to use his powers irresponsibly so he could get them back without caring who he harmed to achieve his goal. Essentially, the opposite of with great powers comes great responsibility. But again, Kingpin's motivation isn't used for that purpose. Despite that though, that doesn't make Kingpin as a villain bad. Really, Kingpin isn't supposed to be deep. He's just supposed to be threatening, dangerous, and have a cool design. And while his motivation doesn't fit with the themes of the story, it's still something interesting for a Marvel villain. Overall, Kingpin is a solid and fun villain. What more could you ask for? In the movies Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, each character fulfills a role while growing and changing within the themes of the story. To see characters such as Miles Morales, Peter B. Parker, and Miles' dad's arcs play out is nothing but satisfying. And remember, anyone can wear the mask.